Welcome to the greatest podcast ever, featuring DrayZera, performance artist, Jackie Hyde, professional wrestler, and singer-songwriter Dan Pettit. Welcome to DrayZera Uncensored. Subscribe, like, and share only on DrayZera Uncensored.
Welcome again to another episode of DrayZera Uncensored. Oh my lasagna, we are heading to the back end of February, and we have got some amazing stuff to show you because we have got a special guest to rid you of all your misery. We have got a gentleman who lives in the land of Norwich on the east coast of England, featured in several publications. Whoa! Infernal Ink to a Warm Reception, 13 Postcards from Hell, 6 Crazy Venom Powers, bounding into comics. Whoa! And also, this gentleman is also a member of the Chartered Institute of Proofreaders and Editors. Wow, number 18850. You know, that is a very prestigious list. That is a prestigious list that I don't think I'll ever get into. His writing comes from a deep love of reading, although life provided some interesting detours. Military to sales, writing and reading to be two sides of the same coin. A constant source of inspiration, so much so I'm losing my voice. Here is Matt BLISSETT. Hello, Matt.
Hello. I'm quite awed by that introduction. So how are you both?
Yes, welcome.
How are you?
Yeah, so...
I'm good, yeah. Just busy at the moment. So the Lightning Thesaurus, which is the first book, comes out on March the 8th.
Yeah, not too long ago from when people are going to listen to this, yeah.
Yeah, so that comes out on or around March the 8th, and during that time I've also continued writing the series, although the aim in terms of intent and execution is that you can read each one on its own and enjoy it as a complete story, but if you read the others there is an ongoing story and characterization there as well. So I felt it was quite important for me, as you said, like, writing and reading go on two sides of the same coin. Yeah. So I look at things both as a reader and a writer, and there is a large amount of overlap, but there is also some key differences.
Yeah.
Of compositional techniques and the language you use, little sort of like tools of subtleties that you can read a book and enjoy it. And I've enjoyed a lot of books that haven't been well written but have had an engaging story. And conversely, I've read books that are beautifully written that are almost taking a moment, detailing something quite average and normal, but it's so beautifully written that it becomes beguiling there. So
yeah.
I always tend to quite liberally. Yeah, I don't sort of restrict myself in terms of my influences and the things I enjoy. Yeah. There's good and bad in everything. And I think it was Sturgeon. Theodore Sturgeon was a science fiction writer, and one of the phrases coined to him is Sturgeon's Law, which is 90% of everything is shit.
And you know, we're going to bring in Jack right here. I forgot to even introduce Jack because of that mad intro that I gave to Matt BLISSETT. Jack, firstly, hello, my bro, and secondly, do you agree that 90% of the world is shit?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Go on, Matt.
So conversely, I think if you just look for that, it also ties in with something called Pareto's principle, which refers to 20%. So Pareto was an 18th century Italian economist who noticed that when he grew peas in his garden, that 20% of the pea crop produced 80% of his yield. And it's called Pareto's principle because it's one of those things that you find repeated in most endeavours. So for me, it's trying to find in my own writing, because I write a lot, I write every day, is trying to find that 20% that's going to produce 80% of my output.
Yeah, I was going to say something important because it's actually, it can relate to me as well, because so, for example, I myself am in the writing process of let's say there could be something in the future lined up, and I have an editor that I talk to on a regular basis, and he tells me, listen, Dre, we gotta cut this, so because that is so correct, because I've written so much myself, Matt, and there's only so much there's only so much of it that really comes onto print into the public domain, because there's so much redrafts you have to do, there's so much that goes in behind the scenes. Like, I was even telling Jack briefly the process, like literally, like my first book that came out, Broken Circuit Board, it came out in 2017, but talks about the book happened like almost like the third quarter of 2016, because the process is long.
Now, before you started writing, because I'll be honest, I genuinely, one of the things that actually put me off writing my much younger years, was I didn't know that there were proofreaders and editors, and that's saying as someone who's qualified as one now. I didn't know that there were proofreaders and editors involved. I literally used to think that every writer was some kind of superhero-honed literary athlete who just wrote a book. And you obviously read it. First of all, I think if you read, for me, I don't know if you have this as well, but from a writing point of view, I read a lot of things with either envy or contempt. I still have a genuine respect for anyone who puts pen to paper, etc. But I've read books, as I'm sure you have, and I've probably written books that have sort of made me go, well, how did this get past all of these fillers that I know now to exist? And that's not to deny, for example, that someone works just as... people work genuinely hard on the worst pieces of art you can imagine.
Yeah.
As they do on the best one.
Yep. I mean, I can tell you right now, my poetry and my writing is far better than even though I do love my music that I even make, because I make music. I've got a long way to go. Isn't that right, Jack?
Yeah. If you went down to Georgia and you met the devil and he challenged you to a musical off, he'd take your soul to hell.
but it's one of those things.
Pretty blunt criticism there, but I think we all feel that way about the stuff we do, though.
Yeah.
It's like, Jack, with your wrestling, for example.
Yeah.
We all have points of where we feel like we're trying to push a penny uphill with the tip of our nose. And you all suffer. I don't know if you get this as well. Do you ever get imposter syndrome?
Oh yeah, 100%. I've had this quite a few times, especially since as DrayZera the artist, I have this outfit. I perform in it. I perform my poetry in the way that I do. And then, as I mentioned before, and when people have interviewed me about DrayZera, I've said to people, there were points of when I was performing, like around 2018-19, that I really felt like there was a facade, that I felt like I was really performing. I was performing alright, but the person behind the mask was feeling very fragile and very almost like the kind of crumbling effect of a boulder, I would say. That's how I felt.
And I think what I hate is hate when, say, when you're doing the show and everyone's all like, oh, you're so cool, and everyone's like, all attention's on you, and everyone's like treating you like you're the shit and that, and then you go back to normal life and then it's just like nothing. And it's just that
like that point where it's just you again, like I'm speaking in the general terms here, where it's you again with your flaws and your problems and the way that I think as well is anybody with a kind of artistic sensitivity, sometimes that's a bit of a double-edged sword in that you can be I think you can be far crueler to yourself in pursuit of something you want than you can in the ways that your subconscious sometimes drives you towards things that you don't want.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Through whatever issues you may have, and so certainly for me, making the drive to make, I hate calling it, I don't hate calling it art, I just worry that it makes me sound pretentious. So when I write and produce my books for people to read, the act of doing it and the act of having done it is kind of like a savings account. So you build up that bit of courage. So when you have those moments where you wobble a bit, you can look back. So Jack, you can look back and think you've done loads of shows and you've injured yourself, but you know you've given your all in the ring. Dre, with your music and your own writing, you know that you've never put out anything that's half-assed.
No, yeah, 100%. Like even like with the music videos and also the content I put on my YouTube channel, like I edit stuff like I apart from my first music video, I've literally edited every single and probably 1 or 2 pounds very early on at DrayZera. Like I've literally edited every single one of my stuff myself with my video editing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely not an easy slog, I have to say, but it's very, in a way, I feel it's very rewarding to really invest all that time, and you learn from it regardless. I don't know what you think. What do you think, Matt, in that regard?
I tend to think that you need the conflict and the struggle to some degree, not to romanticize it, and also as well, there tends to be this kind of unspoken conclusion that art and mental illness go hand in hand. It's not true. I find that the healthier I am, the more productive I am.
Yes.
And conversely, the more productive I am, because when I'm in flow with what I'm doing, it literally, the words can't come out faster than my hands can type them or write them down. And conversely, I'll have days where, because I do a daily word count, and so when I do my daily word count, some days takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
Depending on how I'm feeling or what I'm doing. And then conversely, other days I'm done in about 5 minutes because I know exactly what I want to say. It's just there on the tip of my tongue, and all I need to do is just put it on the page and empty my head of it. And each time out I do that, it's always a case of you're never 100% satisfied with anything that I do, which isn't to soap it or belittle it, or of course to imply that I ever put out anything that's half-assed. It's more a case, I don't know if it's the same for you, Dre, and for you, Jack, with Jackie Hyde. You kind of have to abandon stuff, because otherwise you would just be going over this one piece again and again and again, and you would never release anything. So there is that cycle.
With like wrestling and shit, because I think it's just I think my personality kind of gets bored quickly doing things. Yeah. So if I'm like, say with wrestling and shit, I'll look a certain way for a while, and then I'll get bored with it, and then I'll want to change.
So I'm always interested with this, particularly because I know for the wrestling thing, and I've seen Jack perform. So when you make up a character, because I can sort of talk about, I can talk about my process for creating a character, but it comes more from the inside out rather than the outside in. Yeah. When you create a character, I mean, how much detail do you go into? Because obviously I know you spend a lot of time designing the masks and stuff.
So I changed my costumes for it and my hair.
Yeah.
And everything. So basically, my story of my character changing was he started off in all the jail clothes and the inmate top. So that's basically like you're nothing. And then I joined the Purge, and then when you join the Purge, you're winning more matches and all that shit. So then storyline, you'd be making more money. So then I started wearing all the flashy suits and shit. And then I started getting really, like, kind of eccentric with it. And then I started having my hair all fucking plaited all weirdly and shit. Doing all, like, dyeing the hair different colours. And then when my character started going depressing, I'd start taking it back kind of thing. So I'd start doing it so my hair would start looking like it's not been combed, and then like my clothes and been like I'd like crease up all my clothes so like I haven't been ironed properly. If it's like a shirt, or I'd just keep going back to I'd wear the inmate top if I'm like feel like I'm not in a confident kind of thing.
So the character's internally consistent, but you change costumes and how your hair looks and what masks you use depending on what you're feeling.
The mask was the costumes. Like the mask, I done it so when it was bad, it didn't look that human, and like the face would fall off and shit. So then that weren't. And then the more I started to become myself, when I become a good guy, I started to wear like I started to become like my own face. So then I started to become myself more. And then when stuff happened, and that was like a negative thing, I'd start like ripping up my face, so then I'm not comfortable with who I am again, like that kind of shit.
Yeah.
You know, it's very, very interesting listening to this, because when I began performing as DrayZera, which I made a conscious decision to stop performing as my actual name, perform as DrayZera 4 or 5 months in, and literally, you know, develop like something a bit more flamboyant, something, because I'm using a natural extension of myself, but I feel that as time went on, my character evolved by being a bit darker, a bit more, but still a bit more like, you know, visceral in a way. But I felt that what's important, I think, about the characters that you develop in your story, Matt, and the character of Jackie Hyde, and my character too, is that there should always be core principles of your character that should always exist. Otherwise, if you don't have that core, if the core's completely messed up, or the complete personality is changed a whole 180 without any rhyme or reason, then you've kind of lost yourself completely. And I think it's very important to keep...
You tend to find like when you're sort of grazing and consuming media and such, that you've got a sense of whether somebody, like, you get a sense of whether somebody is authentic or trying to be authentic and failing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is a degree of, like, it's still me sat in front of the computer writing, but I write as MB Blissett rather than Matthew Blissett, because I want to create, it's me, but
That's
it's
weird
my
you say it.
You know,
I always think I'm like, that's always not what I would wear. It's what with my character over what I would do.
Yeah.
Like,
also as well is I think having that little bit of a remove means that you can, like I said, it's still an authentic version of yourself, but you're filtering particular things through it. And sometimes you're not even, for me personally, sometimes there are things that when I get people who've read my stuff come back to me, they talk to me about things that they got from reading my story that I wasn't aware of at the time of writing it. And it's fascinating for me. It's one of those things that's kind of, I don't know if you get this, Dre, and certainly Jackie will do, because you too will benefit from the kind of pure emotional feedback you get from music or wrestling. Literature is by necessity and design a more rarefied experience, and it's not communal in the way, say, a Netflix show is, or a song, or a performance. So and it used to be something that I think people, well, no, I used to think when I was sort of started getting going, well, am I ever going to be able to compete with kitten videos or TikTok, because those are now the modern equivalent of an ancient peasant hearing a church organ, or seeing a jelly painting. It's overwhelming. If you look at studies, a lot of the technology and things we have in our society, our brains are a little bit behind on.
Yeah.
So you think of the the sensory overload, and that's not to say I'm one of those people who goes, oh yeah, we should all go back to living in huts. The internet is wonderful for so many different things. Certainly,
see, wrestling kind of done the same thing in an overload kind of way. Like, I hate how much people do now in a match. Like, they can't just pick someone up and fucking slam on the floor. You gotta fucking throw them in the corner, fucking kick them 5 times, and then fucking pick them up, spin them around, fucking. And it's just, why can't you? It's supposed to be a fight. Pick them up, throw them on the fucking floor.
Yeah. I mean, I think because as artists from different perspectives, we can all see the value in, like you said, just throw them on the floor. Just tell the next story. Just go with that chord progression that feels good. It may not be original to you, but I always...
Like, there is wacky shit's cool and stuff, but there's like times and places for it. Like, if you do it all the time, it just doesn't mean anything. Whereas when everything's kind of got a different feel to it each time,
it's like,
that's not always the same.
It's like a good analogy I'd use for that, Jack, and Dre, I think you'd probably get this as well. It's like I play a bit of bass guitar. I'm not, it's more purely for fun and everything. And when I
started playing guitar,
how are you finding that?
That's alright. I've done it for like 4 or 5 days in a row so far.
Yeah, and usually you'll find is because I'm drawing as well. Like I've started just sketching and going through like a bit of a formal program. And one of the things you find, and I think this marks the differences between artists, creators, and people who don't create as a rule, is like the analogy I use with playing basses is when you talk to people playing bass. Other musicians go, can you slap? Right? Which is, and slapping the bass, slapping the bass, like, that looks really impressive, and when it's done well, it's amazing. But so many people try and do it because they think it's what bass playing is. When the truth of it is, it's far harder to play a standard blues progression, a root note country bass line with feeling than it is to go babada 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 babada.
Yeah.
And I think artistically, knowing the difference between babada 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 and a nice simple root note piece is, I think, comes from the more experience you have creating, performing.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, because when I started performing poetry and that and writing my stuff, I felt that I did a lot of poetry, but I felt that for me, the way I wrote, it was alright. It wasn't the worst thing, but looking back at it, I feel that I've adopted more of a less is more approach with poetry, for example, or a more kind of like exactly the kind of analogy with somebody doing a body slam that's doing amazing in the early 90s or so. I feel that sometimes we can be very guilty of just doing too much for little reward, and I think getting that balance right as a writer or a performer or a wrestler, I think it's not the easiest thing to do, and I think I think it's very important to just be mindful of it, because at the end of the day, as you said, going back to the whole sensory overload part of the conversation, Matt, is that like if digesting information, you have to keep in mind that there's no point if your writing is the best ever if no one flipping understands it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so for me, one of the things that characterised the Lightning Thesaurus, as opposed to my earlier work, which was certainly more contemporary and more modern settings, like my previous three books, Until She Sings, Laugh and Boy, Nothing Keeps Me Anywhere, have all been, and my short fiction's been primarily horror, because I'm a massive fan of the genre. I've appeared on a couple of podcasts talking about Stephen King and John Carpenter, and so I've written horror short fiction before, and I found, for me personally, writing it was more difficult to write simply because you feel like you're exposed so much more. Which I think where the problem comes from. If you hide behind artistry and flash, both on the page in terms of your purple prose, or Jack with your points about somebody wants to do 4 triple backflips and an elbow off the, a flying elbow off the top rope when you know that they can't even land a simple fall. Because I think that it becomes far more exposing and vulnerable to be simple.
Yeah.
But the irony is, that's where most people resonate from. So there's a real earnestness to what I've tried to do with the Lightning Thesaurus. And I say tried because once I finished it, it's no longer mine, per se. It's everybody who reads it. And that's something that I've read a lot of other writers talk about. And I've tried to look at the people who I admire, not do exactly the same things as they do, and just look and internalise the lessons around you. Like, if you're... I don't know if you've ever read... it's a book called Mastery, written by the same guy who wrote 48 Laws of Power, which is an absolutely incredible book. And let me just...
Tell us about
see
it.
if I can find... Well, the wonderful thing about Mastery is it basically breaks down how people get good. Robert Greene, his name is, and he kind of synthesises. So we've talked a lot about information here today, and I think one of the things for me is that knowing the difference between information and knowledge.
Yeah.
And one of the lovely things that Robert Greene does is he synthesises a lot of information from periods in history right up to and including now. And in Mastery, he breaks down the process of how you get good at things. And it was such an invaluable book for me. And I'd say to anyone, any creative, it's an essential book. In that it breaks down for you the pure platonic ideal of how you get good at something.
I've got Alan Watts' audio book on my iPod.
Yeah, Alan Watts Alan Watts from a Buddhist perspective, I think is incredible. Is an incredibly powerful set of ideas that he talked about, and certainly the way that he views consciousness in the universe. One of those things you listen to, and it's like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's a good way to live, and once
changes your whole perspective, doesn't it? Thinking about stuff, and that's like,
Like sometimes he'll just say one thing, and your brain will be chewing on it for the rest of the day because it's one of the things you go, and then you immediately start thinking about it and go, well, how does that apply? How does that make sense? And in Mastery, what Robert Greene does is Robert Greene breaks down through and shows examples and knowledge of how you get good at something, not just good, but potentially great. And one of the ones for me was I've never really had a mentor as such.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who have gone to writing classes. I was in a writing group for a while when I lived in Bradwell because I could get to Galston Library. Still in touch with all of those, but when I moved to Norwich, it became impossible. And that really helped. And I think you always have to look to improve yourself and test yourself.
Yeah, 100%.
So, my friend El once said to me, well, when I used to play in bands, and he was always my drummer, and I was his bass player. One of the things he used to say to me is, if you're the best person in a band, the most talented musician, you need to leave. And I think going back to when we talked about the imposter syndrome and some of the insecurity, do you use that to fuel you going forward?
That is a very interesting question, because here's a very... I'll tell something off the record. So, before I decided to venture out and work for myself, because everything that I do DrayZera, whether it's my graphic design business, whether it's my writing, etc., this is me going full hog, doing my own thing, yeah? No work for anybody anymore. But what happened was that, and this is me completely off the record, at the last place that I worked at was a roller skating place / play area place where I live, right? but I didn't do the roller skating element, but I did everything from working in reception to working at barista. But my main role was party hosting, and I felt that for me, Matt and Jack, I was by far the best staff member there. But I felt to myself, you know what? I learned early on that I knew that how not to big myself up, but I knew the value of myself. But I said to myself, right, in 2020, no matter what happens, right, I'm going to move on and work for myself, because I just feel that like, at the time I was becoming 30, I thought to myself, I want to really push forward and really give DrayZera, the artist, a go, whether it's doing music, whether it's doing writing, whether it's doing performing. Just the brand, I want to push that. And you know what? I left it, and you know what? It's amazing that I left before I ran, because off the record, they just fired most of them anyway before furlough was a thing due to the pandemic. So I left before the pandemic even happened in the UK, and I left, and and you are right, because the thing is that if you feel that you are the best, then I feel that you, in a way, you're kind of losing that motivation, because I don't want to feel like the best. I want to feel like I am progressing forward, because I always feel, I don't know if you both agree with me, I always feel, Matt and Jack, there's always somebody better than you. Or better yet, there's always, you can learn from every single person around you.
That's true. I firmly agree from that. I think you can learn as much from bad if we take it in terms of art, like, you can learn as much, if not more, from bad art as you can from good art. So, like, perfect example for me is one of the things that I really enjoy about YouTube is you get to basically get an education in something like film criticism. So if you watch channels like The Critical Drinker, Red Letter Media, they do these fantastic breakdowns of films, good and bad. So conversely, Red Letter Media will do, like, they do this Mr. Plinkett, and they did this review of 2016 Ghostbusters, the Paul Feige reboot with Melissa McCarthy and that in it. And it's hilariously funny, but it also breaks down why the film didn't work. And I think, certainly, if you've got to use the internet or be used by it. So when I say used by it, we're talking about the type of artists who spend all their time talking about what they're doing and not actually having anything to show for it.
Exactly. Like, show us, don't spray it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Like, the whole thing of, like, they'll tweet 400 times a day, and one of the things is they always put aspiring writer, and I used to do it. I know why I used to do it. I used to do it because it allowed me a degree of remove, so I wasn't, personally responsible for being a writer. It feels like a little bit of an affectation to me, and I see it all the time, and you see it with the same sort of people, and I understand it, I've done it, which is, it's far more exciting to talk about being a writer and writing than it is to actually sit down and do it. The feeling of having written is...
I always say that to Alec. I always say the same thing to Alec. I always say the best part of wrestling is planning it all.
Yeah.
Like, when you get really excited, don't you, when you plan it all, when you come up with it, but then when you're creating it, it just takes, like, quite long sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And I always tend to find with those sort of situations, I just sort of really look to... I'm only ever in competition with myself.
Yeah.
From the bad stuff, like I said, I can watch someone break apart why a film I thought was particularly bad, or sometimes even good, wasn't, and I learned from it, because I used to be a real elitist about the stuff I consumed.
Oh yeah, can you expand on that? That's a very interesting concept.
Well, I always... going back to what I said about Sturgeon's Law,
Yeah.
I think particularly when you're younger, when you sort of choose the music, the films, the stuff you read, it's as much a statement about you as a person. And I was always very, very dismissive of anything that was big. To the point of, I don't know if you ever had this. Have you ever had it where a band or a book or a comic book you like suddenly becomes really popular and everybody's into it?
Yeah.
And then you were there at the beginning when nobody knew about it and it doesn't feel quite special.
With Bray Wyatt. When Bray Wyatt done the mask, what was like pretty much the same as mine, I was so pissed off because everyone was all like, "Oh, this is so creative and haven't been done," and that's like, I've been doing it for years. Hi.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I used to be quite elitist. So
Yeah.
rather than the attitude I have now, which is I just let people enjoy things, not everything is meant for me, I used to be quite elitist, and I used to derive an enjoyment from pointing out the flaws in other people's enjoyment, and it wasn't the healthiest place to be in. And I say this as someone who appreciates sarcasm as a form of humour. It is the lowest form of wit. I think sarcasm and irony appear to be default positions people take in life because it stops them from having to show anything real. It's like we talk about the internet and brands and everything. Well, technically, everybody with a social media account is a brand.
Yes.
It's just whereas Jackie Hyde, a wrestler, Dre, you're a musician and a writer and a poet. I'm a writer. Some people are just like Dave from Essex who likes football and boobs and Love Island.
I mean, I love football, and I'm chill with that part of the female body, but Love Island, nah, screw that. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah, but you see, to Dave, that's representing a set of values that he wants people to know about him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of the weird thing about the internet is that it makes everything impersonal and too personal at the same time.
Yeah.
So a lot of artists, the internet, and branding themselves, I think sometimes, and again it's their choice, sometimes they use the most personal stuff about themselves that's not even necessarily related to the books. And I just think, what are you gaining from sharing that with people?
Exactly. Exactly.
I always liked it where I didn't know as much about the people creating the stuff I like. There's so many. I mean, how often has it been that you found out an actor or a writer you particularly like says the dumbest stuff imaginable on their social media, and you go back to read or watch or listen to it again after you know this, and it's not the same.
Yeah, it's kind of like a bad taste in your mouth.
Yeah. Perfect example. I actually like Kanye more now. For now, he's got it. Now that he's moved on from being
he's accepted that he's crazy.
Yeah. What was that? On one of his one of his mixtapes he released, it was a thing of I love being bipolar. I hate being bipolar. It's awesome. And it was just like one of those he's got such a clever line. But he's full on embraced who he is, and again he's at that stage now where he's untouchable from public criticism.
Yeah, he's reached like God levels, and yes.
There are always going to be certain people past a point that they cannot be swayed by the mob. They call it cancel culture, but really it's the mob.
Yeah.
And there are certain people like him, J.K. Rowling, that aren't, Stephen King. They're never going to be touched. You cannot. There's no amount of mob outrage.
I think
the thing is though, I think
on the Star Wars one.
Sorry, go on, Jack. Sorry.
Which one? There's so many now.
What was it? Baby Yoda was committing genocide when he was fucking eating them things.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like there are people. You see, we can sit here and go, well, to us that's ridiculous, right? But we know, because they tell us, that there are people out there who will think that deeply about something. And then again, I think that's the natural instinct that's heightened by the presence and the ubiquitous of the internet.
Yes.
If you think about it, we're wired as a species for our senses to check when things are wrong.
Yeah.
If you look at something like, have you ever heard of the uncanny valley effect?
No. What is that?
Right. Okay, so the uncanny valley effect is, so a classic example is, you see something that's meant to look human, right? But it looks too huge. It looks slightly off and alien, so your brain experiences cognitive dissonance, and you're aware that it's not human, even though you're also aware that it looks like it's meant to be human.
Wow.
So a classic example is when you look at really, really great CGI, and you can see all of the pores and the hair texture in detail. You know that feeling you get when you see it?
Yeah.
Wow, that's real. What? You're aware it's real, but you're also aware it's not real.
Yeah.
And that feeling is uncanny valley. Now, you get a lot of that with people on the internet. And I think it's that gulf in perception, that in that gulf, that's where the demons lie. That's where you see people with, incredible amounts of talent and drive fall down it.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that shit ruin films nowadays, because I like watching films as an escape and shit, but then a lot of films now have got their political shit pushed in them, and it's like.
And the thing of it is, Jack, is I don't mind it if it's good and part of the story.
Yeah.
But if it's for the sake of it, yeah.
But you can tell the stuff that's shoehorned in, like it's literally hammered into it, and you immediately there was a Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode about it, I think it was the Me Too movement. Yeah, it was the Me Too movement, and I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Right, it's 25 minutes, right, good jokes, well performed, great cast. But this one episode, it crashed to a halt. And I remember Lil and I at the time, we just sat there and looked at each other, and we were like, yeah, we're being lectured to here. And nobody likes being lectured to.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem, is if you really need to be told racism is bad, then that lesson isn't going to reach you anyway. It's also saying, like, unless you are, now, it seems to be the position now, from my point of view, that they always assume the worst. Like, if you don't immediately come out and say, like, if you don't immediately come out and agree with the consensus, you're somehow automatically horribly against it. Which isn't true. It's just you've got other things going on that require more of your mental energy and attention than being seen to be this person.
Yeah. And it is really a shame, because what I find is, like, you notice that, and I mean, on the surface, right? On the surface, there's nothing wrong. I'm saying this right now. There is nothing wrong by having, for example, a multi-diverse cast. Nothing wrong with that. But then you get into the, for example, that's one of my gripes is, though. Like, I know it's a very tiny example. Like in a lot of films these days, like to fit the status quo, or to to appease everybody. It's like, right, we need this ethnicity, we need that ethnicity, to all shoehorn them in, and I'm like, when does this become too contrived? Do you know what I mean? And that kind of annoys me. Like, there are films that are fine with it, but like, I just find it unnecessary at times, and I just feel that it goes back to the whole kind of like.
The trailer for the season 2 of Batwoman.
No, you you can give out spoilers, right?
Perfect
Spoiler
example.
alert! Yeah, go on.
That's a trailer.
Oh, trailers
Just
not
a
even out
trailer.
yet. Sorry, go on. Trailer alert!
They literally shoehorn in as much as they can that she's lesbian. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's
Well,
just
interestingly enough, the Kathy Kane character in the original Batwoman, who Ruby Rose was playing, I don't think because she just left, didn't she? She got quite badly injured on set, and it's really basically with Batwoman. I watched like a couple of episodes of season 1 to give it a chance, and I was like, even as a bad watch, it wasn't entertaining. The fight sequences were just dire. I always think, cause I put that in the same line. I know people like Gotham, but the problem is it's not what people want. People want a good Batman television show.
Yeah.
And because they know
prime.
What?
You want all the characters in their prime, don't you?
Yeah.
But you'd like like the side characters or the people you never really like.
Yeah.
See, I don't know if you two agree with this. Do you find sometimes that stuff is cooler before you know all about where it came from?
I think so. I really guess it depends on the context specifically, but Jack, what do you think?
Well, I'll use a fictional example we're all familiar with, Darth Vader.
Oh, hell yeah.
Cooler?
You mean like in a creative way, how it was come up with, or do you mean in a character like build kind of way?
Both. So when you didn't, when you first saw Darth Vader in, when he walks through the smoke when they board the station and he's like batting away lasers with his hands and stuff, the less you knew about him, the cooler he was to me.
Yeah.
I wanted to know more about him, but at the same time, I wasn't unhappy that I didn't get all of those answers straight away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, adds to the character, doesn't it?
Yeah. And again, as Dre was saying, with regards to when they hammer in particular ethnicities, sexualities, genders, what have you, I think you kind of get that hammered in approach when you see that they don't just focus on what makes a character engaging, they give it so much superfluous detail. So for me, Darth Vader became slightly less cool. It's kind of like Pat Oswalt does this bit where he says, like, imagine George Lucas coming up to you and going, do you like Star Wars movies? Yeah, I love Star Wars movies. And we're doing a prequel and we're going to learn about Darth Vader, Darth Vader when he was Anakin. So, he's going to be like some creepy omen kid, like Damien. And he's like, no, he's just going to be a little kid who's sad. And it's like, it immediately undercuts away from what episodes 4 to 6 did brilliantly, which was create a villain that who managed to redeem himself by the end of the trilogy in such a way that it didn't take away from him.
Yeah. The less is more approach.
The Emperor, he's still badass Darth Vader. You never get, and yet I see it happen so often now that when they can't even do that twist properly anymore.
See, I love 3, but I feel like they could have done a few things better towards the end.
Do you know what I think on that? Because we mentioned this a couple of episodes ago, because we actually briefly talked about Star Wars. One thing about Star Wars is that I feel, I think if they did a one film, not a trilogy, if they just did a film just titled Anakin, I think that would have been far better than a whole trilogy, because there are parts of that trilogy just put me to sleep. I'm sorry, but I don't want to watch a film just full of pod racing. That does not excite me. Do you know what I mean, Matt? What is the point?
That's the other thing as well. Is I'll tell you what one of the big issues is just again, this is just me sitting here thinking about these things that probably nobody else thinks about, but we're writers. It's part of the job description. So I look at stuff that's being made now, and I see guys my age getting really hit up about it, and I'm like, we're were made for us when we were kids.
Yes.
And I think, for me, sometimes a lot of the anger over changes that get made, and that can be everything from plot points to diversity that doesn't feel organic. I think it's because they feel like they're mocking what you enjoyed as a kid.
Yeah. Kind of questioning our intelligence a little bit, but yeah.
So I felt that way about
it's such a powerful thing.
Yeah.
I felt that way about episode 7 with that. I felt like that was more for like nostalgia and stuff than it was for story. That was more like, look at this from the old Star Wars stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
like,
Especially how they revealed the Millennium Falcon as well.
Yeah. It's like the remember berries.
Yeah.
So much. Do you remember? Do you remember? Do you remember?
Yeah.
And after a while, you're like, yeah, I can go and watch that again because that was really good. So far, you're just telling me I should have saved my money and sat at home and watched the original again.
Absolutely. And you know what, Matt, going all the way back, talking about the Lightning Thesaurus, because this has been a wonderful chat, and I've got I'm looking on my sisters right here. I see the proof image right here. It's got a storm in the background, lightning. It's kind of a murky kind of. Yeah, that's the cover, the book cover. You got this gentleman here with a great facial hair, such as yourself, with long hair. Got an intriguing hat. Got a nice kind of like very kind of a woolly coat, but it's a little thin. But it's kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. A nice looking jacket. Got bandages on his hands. Yeah. So going back to the Lightning Thesaurus, talk us about what it's about. Reveal as much as you want, because obviously you don't want to say the whole thing, because obviously people want to read this great book. So talk us through it.
Essentially, the Lightning Thesaurus is set in a fantasy land called Bavaria, which has several different nations on its continent. The main character is Ron Brandywood, a halfling who happens to be a professional bodyguard who mainly works with users of magic that I call linguists. So magic there relates to the actual cultural origins of magic, which was symbols and words. So the idea being is if you become a linguist or a magic of any description, I came up with the idea when I read about professional boxers or MMA fighters or athletes or bodyguards. And I was like, well, what would you need a bodyguard for? And it's because they're obviously trained to punch someone as hard as humanly possible with gloves on, or in a ring, somebody who's trained. Whereas more often than not, the beery idiot who'll come up and start something with them in a nightclub has had no training.
Yeah.
And they're obviously trained in such a way that they can kill with a punch. So that idea stayed with me. In terms of, like, it's quite interesting that somebody with that much raw power would need somebody to protect them. Also, I'd always had the idea of there wasn't really anything written about work. You know, you think about it, we spend so much time a day, for the most part, unless you're lucky enough to be in a position where you're artistically supporting yourself and your hours or whatever your hours are, you find yourself at work for long periods of time a day surrounded by strangers that you see more than your family. So there was that element to it. And I've always really enjoyed fantasy fiction. I've read quite a large amount of it over the years.
Have you read David Eddings?
Yes, I have. Yeah, the Bulgarian.
That, I tell you what, that was when I was a teenager. That really hooked me into fantasy. So, as well as obviously Philip Pullman, but the way that he wrote, I'm like, it was so, like, I just was so enamored by it. Like I literally searched different libraries across where I lived to find the next book.
You see, now that comes on to where, you know, and all of these different, so what tends to happen is writers get asked, where do you get your ideas from? More often
Where do you get your ideas from? Yeah, go on.
I tend to, because I usually just find one particular, something comes up during the course of conversation, what I'm reading, thinking about, and it's just one little idea, and it has to amuse me. It has to amuse me or intrigue me enough to write about it. And what tends to happen is that a lot of these ideas come together from different perspectives, and they just fit together, and then I've got the essential. Then I know I've got something that I can write for 30 to 50,000 words at a time. It's got to be an idea that makes me go, yes, I want to write this, or I want to read this, which to me are the same things these days. So the Lightning Thesaurus is a halfling bodyguard who fights unarmed, so he uses martial arts, and protecting a half-dragon wizard who is on the run from a lord who seeks to capture him and steal his power. And so the book is about their flight to safety and what happens to them and between them along the way.
Wow, that is pretty mad. That is pretty mad. I have to say that's pretty. So tell us then, how long? Sorry, go on, Jack.
One of the things was always said in wrestling is the journey is more important than the destination.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
So it's like not where you're going, it's how you get there, kind of thing. Yeah.
And I was going to say, Matt, in what you said, talking about the journey of this book, tell us, for all the readers, how long did it take you to develop this book, in terms of the formulation and all that kind of stuff? Because obviously, the journey, because, for example, the Queen's Gambit, I read up somewhere that the gentleman that wrote the script for the Queen's Gambit, he basically had it for years. We're talking like a decade plus, and a lot of people said, no one's going to like this because who likes chess? But now Queen's Gambit is literally the talk of the town as we're recording this. So talk us through the journey.
Well, it started off. I play Dungeons and Dragons and run Dungeons and Dragons quite regularly.
Quick side note on that: have you ever heard of a game called Talisman?
Oh god, yeah, I used to play Talisman all the time.
Oh my god, I love Talisman so much. Yes, I don't really play Dungeons. I don't really play D&D, but oh my god, Talisman, give me Talisman. I played it for so long with nights with my mates years ago that I think I passed out asleep.
We used to play it on. I used to play it on the computer.
Oh yeah, the app. Yeah, I used to play it on the app. Yeah.
And I used to have it on my Kindle, and no word of a lie, it got so involved that I had to uninstall it because it just wasn't getting any work done. Because it's just so effective and so I was playing in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign run by my friend Billy, and my previous character, I felt I'd gone as far as I could playing them. There wasn't really anything new that I could that they could do or learn, so I was a little bit bored. And I was like, "Well, can we kill him off in a way that makes sense? Adds a bit of drama to things, and I'll come up with something else." And so Ron started as a joke, which was the opposite of my previous character, who was an 8 foot tall, muscle-bound barbarian.
Yes.
And conversely, originally I was going to go with a wizard, but I was like, I never really. I like playing magic using characters in D&D, but I quite like the thing about 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I like is that it's more balanced, it flows, it's more role playing and character based, which I always enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ron Brandywood was a reaction as a D&D character. And some of the elements, and what I was doing is at the start of each session, I would recap what we'd done as the previous session, so everybody was on the same page. And I started doing the voice, in terms of he's got quite a southern antebellum accent. And then it was like, okay, so, where's he from? Because this D&D setting isn't, America. And so I was like, okay, so he comes from here. And what I was doing is with these... When I was writing up the synopsis of the previous adventure, I found myself writing more of what Ron was doing before, and as well as, and so, and then it sort of came to me. One of the other characters came in with a new character, and then it just hit on me to make him a bodyguard to this other character. So during the course of that game, certain concepts of Ron were sticking to ideas that I'd said earlier. So writing about work, and the fact that boxers need bodyguards, and flipping that to magic users needing bodyguards, because a magic user can't throw a punch worth a damn, but they can chuck a fireball or a lightning bolt, which is deadly. So for most standard interactions, a bodyguard would be the ideal solution. And it all came together from there. And then once I'd finished the first one, it ended in such a way as they were continuing on together. So I'm 42,000 words into the 7th volume. The rest of them are written, and again, as I said, they're ongoing. It's an ongoing series, a sequence rather than a series. But you can read each one on its own merits and enjoy it as a fantasy action adventure. Yeah. And then also, if you've read previous ones, you gain nuance and texture, and there's a bigger story that I hope to tell during the course of it.
Ooh, interesting. And you know what, Jack, do you have any questions you want to ask about the book?
No, I don't know.
Well, I have a very good question to ask you, Matt. Of course, it'll be all in the description. But where can they find the book?
It will be available from Enchanted Forest Publishing, who are publishing the Lightning Thesaurus. It's available on their website, or will be available on their website, www.enchantedforestpublishing.com. And it will also be available through Amazon, typing in the Lightning Thesaurus. It's going to be available in hardback, paperback, and ebook.
Ooh, nice. And you know what? I actually, you just like even if we've never even talked, if I found out that you love Talisman, I'm like, my brother, I am buying this book. I'm like, cause
I'm happy with that. If I've guaranteed at least one sale. I think that one of the things that there is a definitive reason why fantasy has lasted as long as it has, but hasn't really changed that much of its core. Stephen King once said the introduction of one of his books when he talked about writing the Gunslinger trilogy series. Is you're still having Frodo walk through the Grey Havens, and so much fantasy is that Northern European, and there's a reason why they resonate with people so much. I also have found that there is fantasy fiction from different cultures and perspectives that's great as well. There's what's the most recent one I've read? It's Ken Liu, the Dandelion War. It's 2 books so far. The third one I think is due out this year. I hope it is. And they're incredible because they're all done from a medieval Malaysian perspective. And it's just absolutely fantastically done. And again, that's something quite new and innovative. And I'm not saying anything I'm doing is that at all, because I don't want to be one of those. I don't want to be a writer who defines himself by what he's against. I'm not interested in me making the argument as to whether something is good or bad. The proof's always going to be in the book, and it's strange. It feels like almost sometimes when I'm talking about the writing, it feels almost like I'm dancing about architecture. They're 2 very different forms that give different experiences, and so for me the thing is always just the the purest example of my intentions is to read the book. And again, that makes it a more difficult sell because, you know, a song is going to be by necessity far more immediate. You may have to listen to it a couple of times, but more often than not, you'll know whether you like it or not pretty much on first listen. And I've found, for me personally, I'm pretty much just writing the things I want to write.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. Like, there's no point in writing something you don't like, because you're almost like doing it for the sake of just doing it. And I think that can be a very dangerous. That could be a very dangerous anecdote. And I know that people, for example, like, that's what really pisses me off about pop music. For example, people just say cliche things just to make money rather than things that mean deep. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think as well, like, you can tell. One of the things that I've noticed over the years is you can tell when people try and chase a trend,
Yeah.
and by the time it's come out, the trend's already moved on.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
you may not have noticed. I did at the time. You sort of had this whole series of Harry Potter-esque books.
Yes.
You then had a series of 50 Shades of Grey. Or
Oh
Twilight,
my God! Yes, the Black Book section of W.H. Smith's. Bloody hell.
That came from nowhere.
Yes.
Literally, one day it was there, and then the next minute it's got its own section. Now, a lot of those books, some of them sold very well. I don't imagine a lot of them did, because the ones that I sort of like just looked at and was like, oh, really, is where they go, if you like 50 Shades of Grey, you'll love this. And I've used it before in my own advertising, because you're so, if you really let it overwhelm you, and I have done it before, I'm sure you have as well, Jay, is you get to that point of where you know what it's worth, you want to try and communicate it with the same passion you have for it, but also you don't want to come out and say, I think this is brilliant and here's why. So you make yourself soft soap it and undersell it,
Yeah.
because of your own insecurities about it as an artist.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I cannot agree more. And I'll tell you what, my man. The time has flown by. This is definitely one of our longest podcast episodes in a long while, and it just shows how incredible this has been. So yeah, Jack. Is there anything you want to say to Matt?
No, I hope your book sells really well and shit.
Thanks, man. That's what I'm working towards.
Yeah, absolutely.
My hope is well, I can't, as I said, I can't control people's reactions to it.
Sure.
All I can do is just put the best version of it out, which is what I'm doing, working with my publisher, which is a new experience for me. And I'll say, if you're listening to this, if I can pitch it, it's entertaining. It's like nothing you've seen before in a good way. It's got a lot of energy, and I believe it's like nothing you'll have seen before, but in a way that you have and feel good about.
Yeah. And I think that's actually quite intriguing in itself. And you know what? I'm going to say this now. Thank you so much, Matt, for being on here. And you know what? I want you to have the floor. The floor is yours. Plug away anything and everything you want, my friend. Thank you so much for coming in.
So first of all, thanks for listening to me. Those of you listening, thank you for listening to me chat with Dry and Jack. It's been a great conversation. If you want to read more of my work, my website, www.mbblissett.com, has examples of my short fiction, poetry, excerpts from the books. My books are all currently available on Amazon as well, if you just type MB Blissett in the search bar. And I'm on social media, at MB Blissett on Twitter, but mainly the website is where I am most productive and hang out on most often. And the Lightning Thesaurus, the first in Ron Brandywood sequence will be out on March the 8th from Enchanted Forest Publishing. But just to say thank you so much for having me on, guys, and certainly if the opportunity's there, I'd love to come back.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. You can stay in our podcast chat, no problem. Yeah, no worries. No, you can chill there, have a brew, have ever what you want to drink. Very very quick question. Do you support? I know it's a very trivial question to ask. Do you support a football team? Are you into football at all?
I don't know. Football. It's because I was a very nerdy, insecure adolescent and kid.
Okay.
Football was always something that was... the Americans use the term jocks, but due to some of the examples I was given, football has a lot of associations for me. I appreciate it and respect it. My brother actually, Paul, coaches. He's an FA accredited coach, so he coaches a youth team. And my stepdad, Frank, is a massive Norwich City supporter. My uncle actually tried for Norwich at one point.
Wow. So
I've always been around it. My thing tends to be MMA as a sport.
I have to say, one quick note. I think that Conor McGregor. I think he should be finished now. I think there's no point of him fighting again.
Well, are they trying to fix him up with what's his face?
Logan Paul or Jake Paul or something like that.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, that'll be a joke fight.
Yeah, that's a waste. That's a waste of time fight. Like, no, thank you.
I mean, even with even if Conor McGregor had spent the last sort of 6 months eating nothing but burgers and drinking thick shades, even out of shape and overweight, he would still come into the ring and smash Jake or Logan Paul back.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And
I think those sort of things, although they attract eyeballs to the sport, I don't actually think they do the sport any favours.
100%. Like at the end of the day, it's a very fast buck, but it doesn't leave a legacy in MMA, in my opinion.
But I mean, you got to think that a few years ago, people were comparing MMA to human cockfighting, when we all know, those of us who appreciate the sport, that they tend to be the best athletes in terms of mindset that are available.
And the fitness levels you have to go through to be a good MMA fighter is incredible.
Oh, it's insane cardio. The cardiovascular trials alone, because people think when they see... Again, when you guys wrestle, they think they see you kind of padding around the ring, but in truth, they don't realise that your adrenaline and endocrinal system is jacked up because you're right in the middle of your fight or flight instinct. You're also trying to remember all of your spots.
You got to breathe properly and shit.
Yeah.
So you're already having an intense cardiovascular threshold being reached, jumping in the ring or the octagon or whatever.
Yeah.
Then you got to throw punches and try and take the other person down. That's exhausting. And that takes a tremendous amount of effort.
Yeah, I don't agree with that Jake Paul doing that stuff. I think it's kind of cheap in a way. Like, he's basically training to become a boxer, and then he's fighting non-boxers and fucking them up. And it's just like...
He's got a professional boxing license now, yeah. Anyway... Yeah, it is mad. Yeah. It is mad. And you know what?
I hope you do.
And on that note, people, Jack, you want to have anything quick to plug yourself, or you still hate society?
Fuck society.
Right, and thank you very much, people, for tuning into the podcast. If you want to tune in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or follow wherever you're listening to this from. We are available on YouTube, Spotify, and all stations apart from Apple, because Apple is a mad thing. And one day I will sort it out quicker than my dad's hairline. Because even when I was born, oh my days. But anyway, that's another joke here and there between me and my dad. But anyway, yes, thank you very much to Jack, and thank you so much for Matt. Thank you so much. And the Lightning Thesaurus is definitely going in my basket.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great time, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
And we shall, and thank you, and we shall zero later. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.